Hey there, GoPo students. Here is the video about Congress and the President review for the AP test. Again, as you start this video, I want you to have your review packet out and have it open to Unit 5, Congress and the President. This was our very last unit we had actually got to study before the coronavirus shutdown. So it's been a while since we've studied this, about 6 weeks. But here's what is. So have that out, please, and also have out your computer with your court cases open, specifically Baker versus Carr, Shaw versus Reno, and also Federalist Paper number 70 and Federalist Paper number 51 of your primary documents. So if you could have all of those open right now, that would be fantastic. So we could take a look at those together as we go through this. This is the largest unit. The President and Congress and the bureaucracy and the judicial branch are 45 to 50% of the test. I don't want to predict which FRQ topics are going to be on the two questions of the concept application and the argumentative essay. But if I had to bet money, I would bet money that one of the FRQ questions is going to be on either the Congress and the President or the judicial branch and the bureaucracy. I'm not saying it's going to be like that, but there's always the majority of the focus on the test when they do the multiple choice questions and when they have the FRQs. Almost always one of the four FRQs that would have been there would have been on Congress and the President or judicial branch and bureaucracy, and tons of FRQ questions on Congress and the President and judicial branch and bureaucracy. So I'm going to have some documents open up to share with you. I realized for civil liberties and civil rights, I didn't quite do that. I thought I was sharing those with you when I was going over this. But all right, so here we go, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to screen share with you now and start looking at the review handout. All right, so here we go. Nope, that's not there. That's not there. Okay, so here we go. Congress and the President. Some of these I'm going to go over in a lot of detail, and other of these I'm not. The process for going through a bill, ladies and gentlemen, I would just review the process of going through a bill and know that it has to go through the House and the Senate, simple majority in the House, simple majority in the Senate. But remember, in the Senate, they can do a filibuster, which requires a supermajority of 60 votes to overcome a filibuster, which is called a cloture motion. I don't think they're going to have a question about going through the bill pass process, but I would say that could be a possibility if you could use in the FRQ of how difficult it is to pass a bill through Congress. That is because of all the steps and processes it has to go through, going through the House, going through the Senate, getting assigned to committee. Most bills die in committee. Remember all that, okay? So pork barrel projects, pork barrel pet projects, earmarks. Remember, these are all things that get put onto bills as they're going through. For example, in the stimulus package that just got passed, the $2 trillion stimulus package, there was all kinds of pork and pet projects and earmarks stuck in there. For example, there was $35 million for the Kennedy Performing Arts Center put into the stimulus package, which was supposed to be for protecting small businesses and paychecks to individuals. Somehow there was $35 million for the Kennedy Performing Arts Center. There was earmarks in there for abortion funding in there. There were pet projects and earmarks put in there to require fuel efficiency standards on airlines in there. So this was supposed to be a bill about paycheck protection and a bill about small business loans and things like that. And it was just littered with pork and littered with earmarks and littered with pet projects, okay? So remember all the different kinds of committees that we went over. Conference committee is the last step before a bill actually gets passed and sent to the president. Remember, the most powerful committee is the Rules Committee. That's like the traffic cop of the House. That's only in the House. They set the legislative calendar. of when a bill gets voted upon. They also set the time limit for debate in the House. Remember, the House Rules Committee is the most powerful, and that's why the majority party is key to having the most power in the House. If you're the majority party, you control the Rules Committee, you control the flow of legislation, and the majority party will always have a numerical majority on every single committee in Congress. So sorry, there's a little scratch in my back there. And remember, the Rules Committee is why there's no filibuster in the House, because the Rules Committee sets time limit for debate on the House floor. No Rules Committee in the Senate. That's why there's unlimited amount of time for a senator to have the floor, okay? Standing committees are permanent committees that are in Congress from one term of Congress to the next, and they're always there, like the Ways and Means Committee deals with taxes, the Judicial Committee in the Senate for approving judges, the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate for dealing with treaty negotiations and treaty approval. These are examples of that, okay? So a key thing of what the committees do is committees do legislative oversight. One of the checks that Congress can have on the bureaucracy is the committee that writes the law gets to conduct legislative oversight. The committee that is in charge of, say, intelligence can conduct legislative oversight on the CIA, okay? So the committee that's responsible for writing tax code, like the Ways and Means Committee, can conduct oversight on the IRS, the bureaucratic agency that's in charge of implementing tax code, right? And remember, those are 2/3 of the Iron Triangle, the legislative committee and the bureaucratic agency, all right? The leadership positions in the House, I don't know if there's going to be any sort of specific question on this, but I think it's important to know about all the leadership positions and how that impacts the passing of legislation, right? So which political party has the majority in the House and the Senate are going to have the majority leader in both the House and the Senate, and they're also going to have the Speaker of the House, which is the most powerful position in the in Congress, and that's currently Nancy Pelosi, because the Democrats have a majority in the House of Representatives. So I think it would be important to just kind of remember how being the majority party in the House and the Senate is going to impact what leadership positions you have, and therefore impact the power that your party has, okay? So remember what an incumbent is. That's somebody who's in office and is seeking re-election. And if you recall, I showed you a graph, the incumbency re-election rate. And it's something like 85 to 90% of senators get reelected, and around 95% of House members get reelected. It's an extremely high number of members of Congress that lose to challengers, okay? Now, why is that? Well, name recognition, right? People know their name, and most Americans don't know much about politics, so when they see a name at all, they tend to vote for that name. They tend to have more money than their challenger does. And remember, typically, the candidate that spends the most money wins. They can also do casework for their constituents, meaning that, hey, my grandmother's having trouble with her Medicare payments. Let me call my local my representative in the House, or contact my senator in my state and see if they can help me through the process, right? They can do casework. Challengers can't do that, right? And then in the House, but not in the Senate, we can gerrymander districts in a state to make safe seats for members of the House. This only helps the House representatives, not the Senate, because we can't gerrymander the districts for the Senate, because the state boundary is the Senate lines. So we can't redraw straight lines to help out senators, but we can redraw district lines for the House of Representatives, which would help out members of the House get reelected by, remember, gerrymandering those. So let's go through that process again. Remember, redistricting, that happens every 10 years. We take the census, like this year, we're going to take the census in 2020. And then by 2022, I believe, we will redraw, every state will have to redraw the district lines for the House of Representatives. So remember, one of the reasons we take the census is to find out how many people are in each state. And then based off how many people have either moved into a state or moved out of a state, we can reapportion seats in the House from one state to another. Okay, for example, New York the last 10 times we've done the census has lost seats in the House of Representatives because people are moving out of the state of New York, versus Texas has gained seats in the House of Representatives because people are moving into the state of Texas. So we've reapportioned those seats away from states like New York and the Northeast, and they've been given to states in the South like Texas and Arizona and places like that. And so Texas, as they gain seats in the House of Representatives, has to redraw their district lines because they can't just leave their districts the way they are. They have to add 2 more. But even California, who hasn't gained any seats in the House or lost any seats in the House in the last census, we have to redistrict after the 2010 census anyway, even though we didn't gain or lose a seat in the House, because people within the state had moved around, and therefore the districts had become unequal. And so we had to redraw the district lines to make sure that all the districts are relatively equal in population, which, let's go over a couple court cases about redistricting, okay? So remember, there's a court case that says the districts have to be relatively equal in size, and when you redraw the district lines, you can't redraw the district lines based off race. So in your head, let's see if you can remember those 2 court cases. This is what I thought I was doing the other day, and I was not. So let's come up to here, and let's go to this case. Okay, Baker v. Carr, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, Baker versus Carr is the 1 person, 1 vote case. And the Supreme Court said that a state cannot draw, and remember, who gets to do the redistricting? For the most part, it's the state legislatures, which is also why it's important for your political party to have a numerical majority at the state level, because this year, if your political party controls the state legislature, they're basically going to get to draw the state lines or the district lines for the House of Representatives, right? Well, you can gerrymander those lines by drawing the district lines for the House of Representatives to favor your political party. What you can't do is draw the district lines and have unequal districts in population size, relatively. Okay, each representative represents about 750,000 people, maybe 800,000, and they have to be within that range. You can't have a district for the House of Representatives where one district represents 1.5 million people and another district represents 500,000 people. Baker versus Carr said that that is a violation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. So if you remember what the legal ruling on this was based on, it was based on the fact that if you had a district with 500,000 people and another district with 1.5 million people, it's like a person's vote was diluted in the 1.5 million district, and it would count for more in the 500,000 district. So Baker versus Carr says that if you have unequal district sizes for the House of Representatives when you redistrict or when you gerrymander them, you are violating the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, because people are not being protected equally under the law, because you're actually making some votes count more and some votes count less. And so then that's where we have the 1 person, 1 vote case from. If you're doing an argumentative essay, this court case could be used as other evidence than what is listed. So this possibly might be something that might come useful. Now, who remembers the other court case, just in your head, the other court case that dealt with, if you're going to draw districts, they can't be based off race. You can't do racially gerrymandered districts. You remember that? Okay, remember that's Shaw versus Reno. I'm hoping this is working this time here. And again, Shaw versus Reno said you can't draw a district based off race because you are, again, violating the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Okay, so if you are drawing a district solely based off race, that's unconstitutional, because you're not treating people equally under the law. All right, so 2 cases there that we discussed about redistricting and gerrymandering. Now let me stop that there and come back to this right here. All right, very good. And so one of the reasons that members of the House have such a higher incumbency advantage is because of the fact that we can gerrymander the districts and create safe seats for Republicans or Democrats, right? So it doesn't matter if Nancy Pelosi retires at the end of this congressional term. That district has been drawn to where it's all Democrats. You could throw any Democrat into Nancy Pelosi's district and they're going to win. They're going to win. I could pretty much argue the same thing about Devin Nunes, although our district's getting a little more competitive. But still, I think if Devin Nunes were to say, I don't want to run for Congress anymore, I think the next Republican in line would win, regardless who the next Republican is. There might be a Democratic challenger who might come in close, but I don't think they would come within 15 or 20%. I just don't think it would happen. So this district is a relatively safe seat for Republicans and for Republicans in Congress. Okay. All right. Remember the impeachment process, 2/3 vote of Congress. So I'm sorry, it's a simple majority vote in the House of Representatives with a supermajority of a 3/4 vote in the Senate to impeach somebody from office. More about this would be like a check that could be used to keep somebody in check, specifically the president themselves. All right, so let's move on here and let's talk about the president here. Let's talk about some powers the president has. The president, remember, has the power to make the budget, and they go through the OMB, and the OMB is the clearinghouse of the president's ideas, and they project what things are going to cost in the future. And so OMB, remember, is one of the executive office agencies that's in the White House, or they serve in the West Wing of the White House. They're not some cabinet like the Department of Defense or the Department of Labor. Okay. The president gets to approve, or the president gets to appoint all judges, all cabinet members. The president gets to make all treaties, but those require Senate approval or Senate confirmation, right? So the president gets to appoint all judges, to federal courts, but the Senate has to approve them. The president gets to appoint all members who are the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Education, but they require Senate approval, right? The president gets to make all treaties with foreign countries, but again, that requires a supermajority of the Senate, not Congress, just the Senate, all right? Let's talk about some other things the president has as powers. Remember, so the president sometimes, to get around making a treaty, which requires a supermajority vote from the Senate to approve it, the president can make an executive agreement, which is just an agreement between the president and the leader of another nation. So let's say the president makes an agreement with Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. That probably wouldn't happen. But if he did, that would be an executive agreement because it's between the president and Justin Trudeau. It's not between the United States and Canada. And so that only requires a simple majority of vote from the Senate to approve. It doesn't require the supermajority of 2/3. So a lot of times presidents use the executive agreements as a sort of bypass around treaties. Remember executive orders. These are issued by the president directly to the bureaucracy. They act like a law. They walk like a law. They talk like a law. They have all the full enforcement of a law, but they don't have to be passed by Congress, right? So the president can issue executive orders all the time. Presidents use them throughout their presidency. Every president does it. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. Now remember, an executive order can just be undone by the next president with another executive order. Okay. Remember, executive privilege is where the president doesn't have to divulge conversations between himself and his top advisors. And so that is so the president can get full, honest opinions and not have to worry about those being subpoenaed by a congressional investigation, by over here if you want to draw it. Okay. Executive privilege is to protect the president from joint and select committees, forcing members of the president's inter-cabinet and inter-trusted advisors to testify and something like that. Emergency or crisis powers. That could be going on right now. Like, for example, the president just issued the Defense Production Act because we are in an emergency. I don't know if you heard about this, but a few poultry production plants like chicken and turkey are starting to have some of their employees come down with coronavirus, and so they're beginning to shut down. And the president, through their president's emergency powers, enforce the Defense Production Act, which is saying, no, we're going to make some of those stay open to keep fulfilling their federal contracts. So whenever there's an emergency or whenever there's a war, remember, presidential powers expand. Okay. So whenever that emergency or crisis is over, presidential powers shrink again, right? So whenever there's an official declaration of war, the president can nationalize industries. The president can order the rationing of goods or services. The president can sometimes put curfew in place. And same thing, when there's an emergency, like say September 11th, the president has the power to ground all flights like he did. Okay, the president can suspend habeas corpus temporarily. like he did during September 11th. So, but as soon as that emergency or crisis is over, as soon as the war is over, then those powers subside and they go back away. Okay. So the president's ability to pardon criminals is a check on the executive branch. The president can just say to criminals who have been convicted of a federal crime, get out of jail for free. The president can do impoundment, which is refusing to spend money that Congress has appropriated to the government. And the War Powers Act, president has war powers, and the Congress passed the War Powers Act. That is a check on the president from going rogue. Remember, the president can send troops whenever they want to, but those troops have to return within 60 to 90 days. Those troops cannot engage in offensive military action without congressional authorization. Okay, and the president has to inform Congress within 48 hours of that military action that he did. Okay, so what's to stop the president from becoming a dictator? Okay, and remember, we talked about how Congress passed some laws like the War Powers Act and the National Emergencies Act, and to stop the president from just becoming an all-powerful dictator of all time, executive orders can be overturned by the judicial branch, right? So can executive agreements. The president can be impeached. The president can't use executive privilege to stop himself from being investigated for a crime like Nixon during the Watergate scandal, right? Okay, so the Budget Impoundment Control Act makes the president spend money after a certain amount of time. So there are ways to stop that from happening, okay? 22nd Amendment, remember, is the president can only serve 2 terms or 10 years. 25th Amendment follows presidential succession, okay? Who is after the president, the vice president, who's after the vice president, Speaker of the House, or Speaker of the House, President pro temp, and then the cabinet secretaries in the order of which it was put in there. So those are formal sources of power. Remember, there's also informal sources, like the president's approval rating is when the president's approval rating is high, the president has more power than when the president's approval rating is low. And so the president really, if they have a political agenda they want to get passed, they have to get that passed during their honeymoon period. That is, the first 18 months of the presidency is where the president's got the best chance to get legislation passed. Because after the first 18 months, we see that typically a president's approval rating goes down. After the first 2 years in office, typically the opposite party wins in the midterm election, and then therefore the president typically has a Congress that wants to block the political agenda. Like right now, the president has a Democratic House. They're going to do everything they can to stop President Trump from passing any legislation agenda if there was no coronavirus going on. Okay, so there we go. Signing statements, if you remember, is the president interpreting a law as he signs it and saying, this is how I'm going to implement the law as I see as it was written. Okay. Okay, I went over a lot of this. Fed paper number 70. Let's go over that real quick here, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to have that open. Let's get this here. Okay, remember, Federalist paper number 70 was Hamilton arguing of why we needed a single strong executive. Okay, so this could be another primary document you might use in the argumentative essay. Hamilton was arguing that we needed to have a single executive, not 2 or more executives. A dual executive, they would argue, they would create a weak executive. Personal ambition would get in the way of decisiveness that needs to be done in a time of war or a time of crisis, like we are now with the pandemic, right? And he said arguments are necessary for Congress for making laws, but we don't want arguments and indecisiveness for executing laws. Okay, so and we also said that executive orders is that if we had a dual or a tri-executive, then people's personal ambitions and political obstacles would be get in the way of the president doing the job of the president, that is to just execute the law, okay? And then remember, Federalist paper number 51 was arguing that we shouldn't be scared of a president getting too much power or Congress getting too much power or judicial branch getting too much power, because the Constitution was written to naturally put checks and balances against those in place. And so it's extremely important that you remember those checks and balances of how do we check a Congress which keeps abusing its power? How do we check a president that keeps abusing their power? How do we check a judicial branch which keeps abusing their power? And so you have to remember all those different checks, like, hey, Congress keeps writing all these laws which nobody likes. The president can veto the law. Congress writes all these laws which are unconstitutional, but the president keeps signing them. The judicial branch can declare them unconstitutional. The judicial branch keeps declaring all these laws unconstitutional. What can we do about that? We can pass formal amendments of which the judicial branch can't declare them unconstitutional. The president can nominate different justices to the court, and the Senate can approve different justices, which would change the makeup of the court. Okay, so there's all these different things. The Congress can adjust funding for presidential programs and the military. Congress can increase or decrease the number of justices on the federal court. So you got to remember all those checks and balances that were put in place. And Madison was arguing, we don't need to be fearful of a single executive because there are checks and balances in place. But we need, like he said in Federalist Paper number 70, we need a single executive to act decisively when decisiveness is needed. All right. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this now. There's my email. And I want to come back to this. Oops. Okay, so here's some review questions that I think all of you should go over and take a look at here. I've already gone over this, types of standing committees, I did that. President's formal and informal powers, obviously the president's commander in chief, but an informal power would be the bully pulpit, the president's use of the media to directly address people. I think I didn't go over that earlier, okay? The president's approval rating is an informal power, okay? But the president being the commander in chief, the president being the chief executive to enforce laws, those are formal powers. In what way can the president check the power of Congress, judiciary, bureaucracy? I just went over that. Bureaucracy, the president can hire or fire top officials in the bureaucracy. Remember, most people that work in the bureaucracy weren't hired by the president. They were hired through the civil service system. But the president can hire or fire the top officials in the bureaucracy, especially in the cabinets. The president can propose to reorganize the bureaucracy, obviously with congressional approval, okay? Incumbents, I just went over this. How a bill becomes a law, yep, I just went over that. District lines, we just did that. Redistricting, apportionment, I just went over that. The different houses in Congress. Members of the House only serve 2 years, senators serve 6 years, right? A bunch of differences about different types of committees. Remember, the Senate gets to approve of a lot of things that the House does not. Congress together approves of budget. Congress together declares war, right? But when it comes to, say, a treaty approval, to the presidential appointments to judicial branch, presidential appointments to the heads of the bureaucracies, those only require Senate confirmation, not the House, right? And then obviously, remember, in the House, they have the Rules Committee, very structured, no filibusters in the Senate, no Rules Committee, so there can be filibuster in passing a law. What else? What does it take to open another check the Congress has on the president? If the president vetoes laws that Congress has passed, they can override with two-thirds vote. Tons of ways that a bill can be killed. The Rules Committee went over this. Speaker of the House. Midterm election on the president. Usually the midterm, I just went over that. During the midterm election, the president's political party typically loses seats in the House or the Senate or both. Influences. I didn't go over this. Influences on a representative when they're voting for a bill, a member of the Senate or the House. So when we do our mock Congress, most of you would just vote for a bill on whether you thought the bill was a good idea or not. Now, some of you form political parties, right? So one way that influences a member of Congress and how they vote on a bill is what political party are they in? And typically they tend to vote along party lines, right? Because a party can punish them for not voting along party lines sometimes. What do members of their district say, or their state? What do their constituents think about a bill that is being proposed, right? Are there any interest groups or political action committees that would endorse or attack a member of the House or the Senate if they voted on a bill, right? Are they up for re-election when a bill is being proposed? And how would that impact their re-election chances, okay? So what committee do they serve on And if they vote a certain way, is that going to influence their committee assignments by their political party leaders in the next term of Congress, even if they do win re-election? Okay. So, and there's more than that, but it just keep in mind, there's a lot of external pressures on members of Congress to vote on a bill than just how good the bill is. Okay. All those different things. Is the president putting pressure on them? If you have a president which has a high approval rating, is the president threatening to either endorse somebody else or endorse them if they don't vote a certain way on a bill? Okay. And authorizing committees allow Congress to create a new federal program or a new federal agency, and appropriation funds that. Okay, so a lot of stuff I just went over there, ladies and gentlemen. I went over a ton here, but if you have any questions specifically on something I didn't cover here, please email me. And I think it's key to understand that knowing how these are going to interact with each other. You know, how are Congress and judicial branch and the Constitution going to interact with each other? How is the president and the bureaucracy and the Constitution going to interact with each other? Okay, how are all those things gonna impact? So try not to think of it as just, especially when writing the concept application, like they're going to give you some sort of statement and then say, what could Congress do about this, or what impact would this have on Congress, right? Or what could the president do about this, or what could the judicial branch do about this? And then the second thing, Ben, would explain how that congressional action or presidential action or judicial action could be limited, right? And then you would have to explain how Congress and the president or the bureaucracy would impact each other. So think of it in terms of all these units and all these branches crossing over each other. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I'm going to do a very short post review on judicial branch and bureaucracy because I have lectures on that posted on YouTube already. Okay, please watch those lectures, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be doing this, plus I'm going to do one more lecture on the actual process of going through and getting your exam ID put in place. You need to log into the AP test on the 11th, at least 30 minutes beforehand, because there's a bunch of security checks you want to go through. Plus you want to check your system and make sure that your system works with the College Board. I think only Mozilla, Chrome, and Safari work with the College Board. If you're using Internet Explorer, for some reason, I guess the Internet Explorer browser isn't going to work with that. That's what I've been told. I've also posted links on an email I sent on preparing for the day of the exam. This is logistically, it's going to be different, ladies and gentlemen. So go to the College Board, look at those links I posted on this last email I just sent at about 5:30 on May 3rd, and try it out. Try out the test before you go, because the last thing you want is to get in the middle of it, write it up, and then all of a sudden go, I can't get it uploaded, or I didn't take the picture right to upload it, or I didn't save it as the right kind of document. So, okay, email me if you have any questions. I hope everybody's doing okay, and I will talk to you soon. Hope you're doing okay. Chef is out.